Parents who are here, have you ever had dreams for your kids? Remind me never to start a sermon with a question. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be bold and tell you one of a dream of parents. Maybe it's a dream of parents everywhere, I'm not sure. But it goes something like this. Your child is a guest in someone else's home. And they're invited to stay for a meal. And so they sit at the table with this other family, and they participate in the meal using the most wonderful manners. And when the meal is done, your child gets up, takes their place settings and someone else's, and carries it all to the kitchen, and puts it in the sink, the dirty dishes in the sink, or loads them into the dishwasher, rushes back to the dining room table, and helps to clear off the table and continue. Isn't that your dream?
Yeah.
Wow. What parent doesn't live up with the eternal hope that our 10,000 nudges to our kids to pick it up, put it in the trash basket? Have you forgotten where the laundry room is? That all these and many more admonitions from parents to kids will finally, someday, stick. See, these reminders aren't because we as parents are lazy and we don't want to do it ourselves. I've been doing dishes for 40-odd years. I know how to do dishes. I know how to put them away. I've been doing laundry forever, it feels like. I know how to do that. Instead, parents are trying to train a new generation, the next generation, about not just household cleanliness, but about thoughtful, compassionate, helpful, and a loving way to live life. In a way that reflects Jesus as well. Oh no, you're way too ahead.
No, we're not.
Thank you. Disciples. We're all apparently disciples. And by definition, that means discipleship is something that is learned. And the Greek word for disciple is mathete, or mathetes, disciples. It literally means a learner as well as a follower. So in those days, 2,000 years ago, a rabbi, a teacher, would have disciples, followers that would follow this man wherever they went, teaching them. And so they learn as they lived with the teacher. And that's what these first disciples were doing with Jesus. They lived with him for 3 years. They followed him around. And they learned. Could you imagine somebody sticking as close to you 24/7 for over 1,000 days in a row, 3 years in a row? 24/7. Don't you need a little break sometimes? We call it holidays in some ways. For 3 years, these disciples, these first followers, stuck with Jesus. They were learning from him as he taught them, a new generation of people, how to be the children of God that God's designed them to be. In the summer of 2014, what happened? Huge in the world. Come on, I know it was only 3 years ago. Where was the World Cup? Where that movie took place. Rio. Sorry?
Who cares?
How do I come back from that? Well, in 2014, there were 10 people in the world who cared that there was a World Cup going on, and that it was in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And although there was a lot of discussion in the news about the state and the shape of Rio, and how this was making such a negative, in some ways, economic impact upon the city and upon the peoples of Brazil. One of the biggest stories, I don't know if you noticed it, that came out of Rio was about a loser. Japan lost its opening game to the Ivory Coast. Now, when you've got a soccer game at the World Cup level, you've always got a winner and a loser. But what hit the world so much with this losing team was not so much the outcome of the game as the aftermath of that game. Typically, when a nation, a country at the World Cup loses their match and they're kicked out, the fans of that country go a little bit berserk. Britain is especially known for its rowdiness after a loss. Their football fans taking to the streets, overturning cars, burning wheels and tires, and breaking all sorts of windows and looting. But what struck the world was when the Japanese team lost their match. The tradition happened yet again, that all the fans of the Japanese team took to the stands to clean up. That's what they do. Japanese fans showed honor and respect to the winner by cleaning up the stands. And that's one of the pictures of what's happening. Not many people there, but the Japanese fans are going around cleaning up the litter. In Japanese culture, it's extremely rude to not clean up after oneself. Japan's, after all, a small island with lots of people, so they have to pick up after themselves. It's a matter of showing respect to your elders and your teachers to pick up after them. That's why, I don't know if you can imagine this, I'm going to ask the school kids, do you know the names of your custodians in your schools? Always good to greet them as another human being. Well, in Japan, the public school systems don't have custodians because the kids go there on the weekends to clean the schools. Can you imagine doing that on your Saturday, the day to sleep in? Oh my. But they take it as an honor and a privilege to clean up their schools. And there's even in Japan a series of wonderful public parties known as Hanami season, a time for picnics and public celebrations in the beautiful parklands and gardens for which Japan is also famous for. As the Hanami celebrants leave these public parties, they always leave a pristine public space. No matter how hard the day and the night of partying was, during Hanami season, there will never be any sign that there was anybody ever there. Part of Japanese tradition is that you bring your own trash bags and you clean everything up. Big party? No problem. No leftovers. Nothing. The path of discipleship is learning to live not by our human nature, but by Holy Spirit nurture. It is our human nature to litter, actually. Whether that's littering our food, our garbage, or littering our mood around. It's human nature to strike back. But our human nature needs an influence of outside nurturing. Our human nature needs divine nurturing. And only by the nurturing of the Holy Spirit of God dwelling within us do we learn, does our human nature learn to clean up, to turn the other cheek, to walk the second mile, to go the extra distance, to give our coat away. Parents teach our toddlers to do what doesn't come naturally. What do we say? Don't touch. Don't bite. Don't put that in your mouth. Be nice. Be polite. And we in some way try to instill in our toddlers and children as they grow up to live peaceably with one another. In other words, don't fight. And these are baby steps in becoming a loving human being. And there are baby steps in becoming a dedicated, devoted follower of Christ. And this week's gospel text from Matthew chapter 10 provides the faith community with some new rules and regulations that prescribe or describe the behavior of anybody who would want to become a follower of Jesus Christ. And these behaviors were rather striking and strange in the first century AD, and they're still rather striking and strange in this 21st century. For a mature follower of Jesus, there are no rules. Yay! Except one. The rule is Jesus. When Jesus rules our lives, when he is really Lord of our lives, then every situation we will ever encounter will be covered. When you hold your peace with Jesus in our lives, we hold our peace with his love in our hearts. When we cry out with Jesus ruling our lives, we cry out with the love of Jesus in our hearts. When we correct, when Jesus rules our lives, we correct with the love of Jesus in our hearts and lives. In all things, we let the root of love within us grow. For out of this root, God's love in Christ, will come goodness and gentleness and everything that the Spirit encourages us to grow in as followers of Christ. When the love of God rules all of our life, rules our thoughts, our words, and our actions, will be then yielded to that love of Jesus. And if our love of God is real and growing deep and wide, then truth flows naturally out of our lives. As the Apostle Paul put it in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, let all that you do be done in love. And that means, as Jesus talks about with his disciples here in Matthew 10, that we are to welcome in love the stranger and the strange, as if we are welcoming Jesus himself. Jesus called upon all who would follow him to welcome a prophet. He called upon his followers to welcome the righteous. He called upon his followers to welcome the little ones by giving them a cup of cold water. And you might actually call this Jesus' threefold list of losers. What do I mean by that? If you are a prophet of God, you did not usually get good press until 200 or 300 years after your death. And your death usually occurred because you were being stoned for being a prophet of God. Booted to the curb and then stoned. The righteous were never determined to be righteous during their lifetime. The services of the righteous person was never deemed anything but annoying and getting in the way of political progress while the righteous were alive. The little ones, vulnerable, defenseless children, those without any kind of social or political power or economic power. The little ones were never part of anybody's social equation. There were no such things 2,000 years ago in the Middle East as a social safety net or an umbrella to protect the little ones, those that were considered such. But here Jesus is worrying about those that no one else worries about. And he's challenging and encouraging all of his followers to be likewise caring for those that no one else cares about. Jesus is being kind and considerate to those that nobody takes seriously. The disciples were being told that despite the most horrible encounters that they might experience, even if in their faith in Jesus, even as followers of Jesus, if they are treated as a prophet, in other words, they're stoned, even if they're treated as a righteous person, in other words, they are not welcome anywhere. Even if they are treated as a little one, they are to still treat everybody with love. And the disciples of Christ are also encouraged and challenged by Jesus to treat all the prophets, all the righteous and all the little ones, with his love and his care. The message of Matthew 10, especially verses 40 to 42, communicates to the Christian community, whether it's 2,000 years ago or today, that Jesus is always waiting to be welcomed in our midst, whether as a prophet or righteous one or a little child. Jesus' presence is always palpable, even if it's not always palatable in our lives today. So let's just think about a cup of cold water for a moment. I find it very helpful, as you know. A cup of cold water. Jesus taught that we are to be hospitable, even to strangers, as if we are welcoming and caring for Jesus himself. And in that far-off place and time, in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, people practiced hospitality almost as second nature, as a virtue. The stranger was to be treated like a brother or sister. The visitor was to be given the place of honor. And water was not easily obtained. 3.7 miles, the average distance a woman or girl walks in Africa as of 3 years ago to find water. And it didn't say fresh water. 3.7 miles one way, twice a day. They usually carry these large water jars on their heads, once in the morning, early in the morning, and once again in the evening. There was no such thing 2,000 years ago as refrigeration. So cold water, if they got cold water early in the morning, was not going to stay cold for very long. So to give a cup of cold water to a little one, a child, a helpless, vulnerable child that the rest of society could care less about, to give a cup of cold water to a little one was a high level, extremely high level of Middle Eastern hospitality. And to give it to a little one was unheard of. An American journalist named Ashvin Malavi traveled through Iran a few years ago, gathering information for a magazine article that he was working on about the changes that were sweeping through Iran. Fear of terrorism causes so many people in our world to view Iranians with suspicion. But Malavi reported that the Iranian people he met were extremely gracious and very welcoming. In fact, Iranians are supposedly famous for their hospitality to strangers. So when Malavi mentioned to his taxi driver one day while they were on the road that he wanted to find one of those roadside stands to get a fresh glass of pomegranate juice, the taxi driver went out of his way and found one, pulled over, jumped out of the car, and tried to buy him one. When the juice seller realized that Malavi was a visitor, a guest, the juice seller wanted to pay for the cup of pomegranate juice. So Malavi wrote that for a few minutes, the three of them were in a discussion about who would have the honor of buying him a glass of pomegranate juice. Visitors to that part of the world report that such demonstrations of hospitality to strangers are very common. It was Jesus and is Jesus' expectation that all of his disciples should be hospitable. And especially, it seems, especially to those that our world counts as nobodies. And if anyone gives a cup of cold water to one of these little ones because he is my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward, Jesus said. You see, it's all about how do we love God with our whole being, so that we are then able to recognize, to see, and welcome Jesus in our midst through whomever we meet. And you know that Jesus Christ can look pretty disheveled and messy as one of the pictures we have of him is nailed to a cross in the most obscene form of public execution ever. And that leaves a lot of leeway for us to see God's face in a lot of other horrible situations we might encounter around our world. Welcome Jesus in whatever form or frame we meet him. And this can't be done by human nature. It can only be done by second nature or second nurture, by means of letting the Holy Spirit of God nourish and nurture our souls and our lives from the inside out. How will you live as a mathete, a disciple, a learner, a follower of Jesus this week before you?